Chapter 25. Link stood before the entrance to the stone tower, the last great hurdle in his journey. The towering structure loomed before him, an impossible monolith of ancient stonework stretching into the sky. The vast canyon surrounding it felt eerily still, save for the restless spirits that haunted the air. Blue bubbles drifted aimlessly through the open space, their cursed flames flickering like malevolent will-o'-the-wisps. High above, flocks of gui circled like scavengers waiting for a lost soul to collapse. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the distant echoes of forgotten voices. Tal hovered beside Link, her usual chatter subdued by the sheer scale of what lay before them. Well, this is definitely the place. The grand entrance was perched atop a precarious stone platform high above Link's reach. The bridge that once connected it to the outer walkway had long since crumbled, leaving nothing but empty air between him and the temple. Link scanned his surroundings. A series of ancient stone blocks, half buried in the dust, formed a makeshift path leading upwards. He moved quickly, shoving heavy blocks into place, creating footholds where he could climb. When he could go no higher, he pulled out his hookshot, aiming for rusted metal grates embedded in the rock. The mechanism reeled him in, launching him up to the next ledge. Step by step, pole by pole, Link ascended, moving carefully to avoid the curses of the blue bubbles and the sharp talons of the gui. Finally, after a daring hookshot swing, he landed on a platform before the entrance. But the path was still incomplete. A massive gap lay before him, and no amount of jumping or clever climbing would get him across. Ugh, really? Tattle groaned, darting ahead. We came all this way, and now we can't even get inside? Link stepped forward, taking in the surroundings. Four large buttons were positioned before the entrance, each carved with faded markings. He pressed one with his foot, and for a brief moment, a section of the bridge rumbled and started to move, only to stop the second he stepped off. Tattle fluttered her wings. So, we need something to keep them held down. Link thought for a moment, then reached for his ocarina. He played the solemn notes of the Elegy of Emptiness. As the final note echoed into the air, a strange energy rippled around him. Then, in the very spot where he stood, an eerie, lifeless statue of himself appeared. Its vacant expression stared forward, unmoving, pressing the button beneath it. Tattle shuddered. I still don't like that thing. But there were still 3 more switches. Link pulled out his Deku mask and felt the magic surge through him as his body shifted into his smaller, wooden form. He played the elegy again, and another statue, a blank-eyed wooden figure, manifested, keeping the second button pressed. One by one, he continued. The Goron statue stood with a powerful stance, its rocky body weighing down the 3rd switch. The Zora statue, elegant yet lifeless, held the 4th in place. With all 4 switches activated, the ground trembled. Stone mechanisms groaned to life for the first time in ages as enormous blocks shifted into place, forming a bridge to the grand entrance. Tattle hovered over the new path. Well, that was creepy, but at least it worked. Link took a breath, then stepped forward into the entrance of Stone Tower Temple, and immediately, an overwhelming sense of unease washed over him. The air was thick and heavy, as if the temple itself was alive, watching him with unseen eyes. The walls were constructed from massive stone slabs, adorned with intricate yet alien carvings, symbols that depicted an ancient civilization long forgotten. The space seemed impossibly vast, its towering pillars stretching high into darkness. The floor beneath him was treacherous, a maze of narrow pathways winding over endless, bottomless pits. A single misstep would mean falling into the abyss below. Strange, floating platforms hovered in the distance, suspended by some unknown force, shifting slightly as if testing Link's balance. Tattle floated close to Link's shoulder, her light casting eerie shadows on the cracked stone. This place feels wrong. Like it shouldn't exist. This really is the source of the darkness. Cautiously, Link stepped forward, navigating the thin walkways with steady precision. As he turned a corner, a sudden red glow flared to life ahead of him. A massive, One-eyed stone statue, a slumbering Igor, stood motionless, blocking the path. Its single eye remained shut, its body covered in cracks and rust from years of disrepair. Link knew better than to move carelessly. As soon as he stepped within range, the Igor's eye snapped open, flaring with a crimson light. With a loud, grinding noise, the statue came to life, stomping forward with heavy, thunderous steps. Link quickly pulled out his bow and aimed for the glowing eye. The arrow struck true, making the Igor reel back, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. It lumbered forward again, its massive fists slamming against the stone pathway, making the ground quake beneath Link's feet. He fired another arrow, then another, until finally, with a final shuddering groan, the Igor collapsed backward, disintegrating into dust. Tal sighed in relief. With the path now clear, Link pressed on, his boots clicking softly against the worn stone. Soon, he reached a large, open chamber with no visible exit. The only feature in the room was a single Deku flower nestled in the center of a small platform. The wind howled through unseen cracks in the temple walls, creating shifting air currents that spiraled toward a distant ledge high above. Link pulled out his Deku mask and placed it over his face. His body shuddered as the magic took hold, shrinking him into his wooden form. His feet felt lighter, his movements more nimble. He stepped onto the Deku flower, crouched down, then shot into the air, his spinning petals catching the wind. The air currents carried him upward, guiding him toward the far ledge. He carefully angled his descent, narrowly avoiding sharp stone formations jutting from the walls. As he landed safely, he removed the mask, returning to his normal form. He stepped forward into the next chamber, where ghostly figures hovered ominously in the dim light. Pose floated about the room, their eerie laughter echoing against the stone walls. Blue bubbles drifted aimlessly, their cursed flames pulsing as they roamed. Link wasted no time. He drew his sword and charged, slashing at the pose as they flickered in and out of existence. One let out a shriek as it dissolved into nothingness. A blue bubble lunged toward him, its cursed aura crackling. Link raised his shield just in time to deflect it, then swung his blade, dispelling the cursed entity with a single strike. With the enemies vanquished, the doors rumbled open, granting him access to the next part of the temple. Tattle hovered near him, glancing back at the empty chamber. This place just keeps getting weirder. Link took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway, immediately feeling the intense heat radiating from the room ahead. The chamber was filled with molten lava, glowing a brilliant orange, bubbling and shifting beneath a series of narrow stone platforms. The air wavered from the sheer heat, making the entire space feel surreal. Tattle hovered beside him, wincing. Ugh, it's like stepping into a furnace. Be careful, Link. Without hesitation, Link pulled out the Goron mask and placed it over his face. The familiar sensation of transformation surged through him, his body transforming into the form of a Goron. As he stepped forward, the molten lava didn't burn him, his heavy stone-like body resisted the heat, allowing him to wade through safely. With each step, his boots sizzled against the molten rock, but he remained unharmed. Reaching the other side, he removed the mask and took a moment to regain his bearings. A tall stone door stood before him. As he pushed it open and stepped inside, the heavy door slammed shut behind him with a loud thud. The new chamber was vast and eerily quiet, its walls covered in faded tapestries with unreadable ancient script. The dim torchlight barely reached the high ceiling, leaving much of the room in shadows. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the air, and in the center of the chamber, a spectral figure began to rise. A Garo master floated before him, its deep green cloak flowing unnaturally as if caught in a non-existent wind. Unlike the lesser Garo warriors Link had encountered before, this one radiated an unsettling presence. Its golden mask was marked with intricate patterns, and its dual blades gleamed in the flickering torchlight. The Garo master's voice echoed hauntingly, "You have come far, but this is where your journey ends, intruder. Only those who walk the path of shadows may pass." Without warning, the Garo master lunged, its twin blades slicing through the air with lightning speed. Link barely had time to react, rolling to the side as the sword struck the stone floor where he had just stood. Sparks flew from the impact, and before he could counter, the Garo Master vanished in a swirl of smoke. Tattle darted around frantically. Link. He's really fast. Stay sharp. Link gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on his sword, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. A flicker behind him. He spun just in time to parry another swift strike, the clash of metal ringing through the chamber. The Garo Master twisted gracefully in midair, vanishing once more. This wasn't like the ordinary Garo warriors. This one was faster, more cunning. Link knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He steadied himself, his eyes darting around the room, waiting for the next attack. The battle raged on in the dimly lit chamber, shadows flickering wildly against the stone walls as Link and the Garo Master clashed in a deadly dance. The spectral warrior moved with an eerie grace, its tattered green cloak swirling as it vanished and reappeared unpredictably. Link barely had time to breathe. The Garo Master lunged from the darkness, twin blades flashing like streaks of silver. Link deflected one strike with his shield, but the second blade sliced across his tunic, narrowly missing his ribs. The sheer force of the attack sent him stumbling back. Tattle zipped around frantically. He's too fast, Link. You've got to find an opening. Panting, Link tightened his grip on his sword and steadied himself. The Garo Master circled him like a phantom, its voice a whisper carried by the stagnant air. You fight well, but your sword alone will not save you. With a sudden burst of speed, the Garo Master launched forward again. Link dodged, barely avoiding another lethal strike, and countered with a quick spin attack. The Garo Master vanished in a cloud of smoke just before the blade could connect. Link's eyes darted around the chamber. He could hear the faint rustling of fabric, the nearly silent footsteps moving through the darkness. Then, he caught a glimpse of movement to his left. He reacted instinctively, raising his sword just in time to meet the incoming blades. Sparks flew as steel clashed against steel. Link gritted his teeth, pushing back against the force of the attack, before ducking low and rolling to the side. As the Garo Master reappeared once more, Link saw his chance. The warrior hesitated for just a moment, a brief misstep after its relentless offense. Link lunged forward, swinging his sword in a powerful upward slash. The blade cut through the green fabric, striking true. The Garo Master let out a breathless gasp, staggering backward. Its body shimmered, the illusion of solidity beginning to fade. Tattle hovered close. You did it, Link. You actually got him. The Garo Master, now kneeling on one leg, slowly raised its head. Its mask, cracked from the final strike, barely clung to its face. Despite its impending defeat, there was no malice in its voice, only acceptance. You are strong, stronger than I had expected, it admitted. But strength alone will not be enough to conquer the darkness ahead. Link lowered his sword slightly, listening. The Garo Master continued, take your prize and use it on the red emblem at the entrance of this temple. Only then will the path be revealed. A heavy silence settled over the room. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the Garo Master reached into the folds of its cloak and pulled out a small bomb. The flickering light of the chamber reflected off its surface. This is the way of us, Garo. Before Link could react, the warrior vanished in a brilliant explosion of smoke and fire. The blast shook the room, and when the haze cleared, only the lingering embers remained where the Garo Master had stood. Tattle shuddered. It's almost sad, almost. Link took a deep breath and put his sword away. The great battle had ended. Chapter 26. As the smoke from the Garo Master's final act faded into the dim chamber, a deep rumbling shook the stone floor beneath Link's feet. From above, a heavy iron chest crashed down into the center of the room, sending up a cloud of dust upon impact. Tattle hovered closer, her glow flickering with curiosity. Well, that was dramatic. Think this is the prize he was talking about? Link approached cautiously, pressing his hands against the ornate lid. With a deep breath, he lifted it open. A radiant light spilled out, forcing him to squint as he reached inside. His fingers wrapped around a bundle of arrows, their shafts cool to the touch, but each tip gleamed with a brilliant golden glow. Tattle gasped. Light arrows. Whoa, these are the real deal. That Garo guy wasn't kidding when he called it a prize. Link nodded, tucking the bundle safely into his quiver. He remembered the great power these arrows held. There was no doubt that these arrows were the key to uncovering the true nature of the stone tower. Without wasting time, he retraced his steps through the temple, carefully navigating past the lava pits, avoiding prowling Igors, and using the Deku flower once again to glide across the deep chasms. Eventually, he emerged from the temple's entrance and stepped back into the open air. The stone tower loomed before him, its jagged architecture stretching toward the heavens like the skeletal remains of some ancient giant. He scanned the towering structures carefully until his eyes landed on a strange red emblem carved into the stone, just above the temple's archway. Tattle zipped up to it. That's gotta be it. Go on, try it. Link pulled out his bow and knocked one of the light arrows. The arrowhead pulsed, golden energy swirling within. Taking careful aim, he released the string. The arrow soared through the air, striking the emblem dead center. Instantly, the emblem ignited in radiant light, its glow spreading outward like cracks of lightning. The ground beneath Link trembled, and suddenly, an unnatural force pulled at him. The sky itself seemed to shift. The very fabric of reality groaned as the world twisted around him. The stone tower spiraled, the canyon wall stretched, and the distant horizon flipped. Link gasped as he felt himself losing his footing, sliding backward as gravity itself betrayed him. He grasped at the stone floor, his fingers scraping against the ancient surface, but the force pulling him into the sky was too strong. His grip failed. For a fleeting moment, he felt weightless, his body falling upward into the sky that had become the ground. The wind howled in his ears. Tattle's panicked voice barely reached him before his vision faded to black. Silence. Then, his eyes fluttered open. He found himself once again in front of the stone tower temple, but everything was different. The temple was upside down. The sky loomed eerily below his feet, stretching endlessly into a vast abyss. The stone pillars that once pointed toward the heavens now stabbed downward. The canyon walls curved in impossible angles, defying logic. Link slowly pushed himself up, shaking off the lingering dizziness from the impossible shift. Tattle hovered beside him, her voice quiet with disbelief. What just happened? The whole place, it flipped. We were falling into the sky, but now. Link took a deep breath, steadying himself. Whatever strange magic governed this land, it had just reshaped the entire temple, or at least his perception of it. He turned his gaze toward the entrance. There was no turning back now. Link stepped cautiously into the inverted temple, his boots scraping against the stone floor, or what should have been the ceiling. The familiar architecture had been twisted into something both recognizable and completely foreign. The once bottomless pits he had carefully avoided before now yawned above him like dark, hungry voids, while the narrow bridges and pathways stretched out over the sky, defying all logic. The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural energy that pressed against his lungs. Each breath was shallow, as if the temple itself resisted his presence. Tattle hovered close, her light flickering uneasily. This place was bad enough before, she muttered. Now it feels wrong. Like we shouldn't be here even more than before. Link's focus remained sharp as he moved forward, navigating both the familiar and the unknown. He retraced paths he had once taken, but some corridors had shifted, revealing new passages that hadn't existed before. The stone walls seemed distorted, bending in impossible angles, as if the temple had been twisted by some unseen force. Poes flickered in and out of sight, their ghostly laughter echoing through the hollow halls. Blue bubbles hovered in dark corners, their cursed flames burning with an eerie light. Link fought his way through them, striking down the restless spirits and clearing a path deeper into the temple. Then, he reached a large pool of shimmering water, one he hadn't recalled seeing earlier. The surface rippled softly, reflecting the strange architecture above. Without hesitation, Link pulled out his Zora mask and placed it over his face. His body shifted, limbs elongating as fins formed along his arms. Taking a deep breath, he dove in. The water was cooler than expected, sending a chill through his body as he swam forward. The currents twisted in strange patterns, and the further he went, the more he felt as though the temple itself was watching him. He maneuvered through an underwater tunnel, using his fins to propel himself forward until he found an opening. Breaking the surface, Link emerged into a massive chamber bathed in an otherworldly glow. Strange blue flames floated above the floor, casting wavering shadows along the walls. The air was unnervingly still, yet the flames flickered as if caught in an unseen wind. The room was vast, with towering pillars stretching toward the sky, or rather, toward the endless void beneath them. The architecture was grand, but its purpose was unclear, as if it had been designed for something long forgotten. Tattle hovered beside him, whispering in awe. "This place. What is it?" As Link stepped cautiously forward, the ground beneath him trembled. A sudden burst of chilling wind rushed through the chamber, and, from the shadows, a figure emerged, its form flickering like a mirage. A wizrobe. It stood tall, its ragged cloak billowing as it raised its staff high above its head, stomping its feet rhythmically against the floor. The eerie blue flames in the chamber danced wildly in response, casting long, twisting shadows along the walls. Tattle gasped. "Another one. Just like at Snowhead." Before Link could react, the wizrobe vanished in a blur, reappearing across the room with a swirl of dark energy. It pointed its staff at Link, and a bolt of magic shot forth, streaking toward him. Link barely rolled aside in time, the crackling energy scorching the stone where he had just stood. The wizrobe cackled and disappeared again, teleporting between the pools of shadow in the chamber. Link gritted his teeth and drew his bow, scanning the room for the next attack. A flash to his left, too late. Another blast of energy came streaking toward him, and though he managed to raise his shield, the force still sent him skidding backward. "This isn't working," Tattle cried. "He's too fast in the dark." Link narrowed his eyes, gripping his bow tightly. He had one idea left. Taking a deep breath, he switched arrows, knocking a light arrow onto the string. As the wizrobe prepared another attack, Link aimed not at the enemy, but at the ceiling. He loosed the arrow, and as it struck the stone above, a brilliant explosion of light flooded the chamber. The eerie blue flames flickered wildly before snuffing out entirely, leaving the room bathed in golden radiance. The wizrobe froze mid-chant, its body trembling as if in pain. "Now's your chance, Link," Tattle shouted. Not wasting a second, Link pulled back another light arrow and let it fly. The arrow found its mark, piercing the wizrobe's chest. The creature let out a shrill, unnatural scream as light coursed through its form, its body flickering uncontrollably. Then, with one final shriek, the wizrobe exploded into shards of dark magic, which scattered like dust in the air. Silence fell over the chamber. Link exhaled, lowering his bow. The oppressive weight in the room seemed to lift, and the eerie stillness was gone. Tattle gave a relieved sigh. Finally. "I swear, if I never see another one of those things again, it'll be too soon." The chamber lay still once more. Chapter 27. As the last echoes of the wizrobe's defeat faded, a loud, metallic clang echoed through the chamber. Link turned just in time to see a chest fall from above, or rather, from the floor, given the temple's inverted nature. It landed heavily, its lid flinging open from the impact. Approaching cautiously, Link peered inside. Nestled within the chest's dark interior was a strange, heavy-looking iron mask. Unlike any of the masks he had collected so far, this one had a grim, almost impenetrable design. Curious, Link reached in and grasped the mask. It was colder than he expected. He lifted it and slowly moved it toward his face, intending to put it on. But before the mask could touch his skin, an unseen force shoved him backward. Link staggered, barely keeping his footing. Tattle zipped up beside him. What was that?" Frowning, Link tried again, gripping the mask firmly and raising it toward his face. The moment it neared, The same invisible force repelled him, stronger this time, as if the mask itself refused to be worn. After one last attempt, which ended with him nearly tumbling onto his back, Link exhaled sharply and tucked the mask away. "Well, that's weird," Tattle muttered. "But hey, every mask we've found so far has come in handy, so I'm sure we'll figure out what this one does." Link gave a small nod. He wasn't sure what kind of power this mask held, but something about it felt different. Pushing the mystery aside for now, he turned toward a newly opened door that had appeared at the far end of the chamber. Steeling himself, he stepped through, once again plunging into the twisting paths of the inverted stone tower temple. The corridors ahead stretched in unnatural angles, gravity feeling both familiar and entirely wrong at the same time. Link carefully navigated the narrow pathways, leaping across gaps that seemed to fall into the sky below, dodging floating skulls that snapped at him from the shadows. Tal stayed close, her glow casting long flickering shapes on the walls as they pressed deeper into the temple's secrets. As Link stepped into another vast chamber, he immediately sensed something was off. The space was eerily silent, save for the distant hum of magic in the air. The stone walls stretched high, their jagged edges disappearing into a hazy void. There were no doors, no visible paths forward, only an unsettling stillness. Then, without warning, a powerful force yanked at Link's satchel. The iron mask he had collected earlier tugged violently, slipping free from his grasp and clattering to the floor. Tattle gasped from the sudden loud clang. Link bent down to pick up the mask, but the moment his fingers touched its cold surface, a powerful pull surged through his arm. His boots scraped against the stone as the mask dragged him upward, defying the gravity that should have held him to the floor, or rather the ceiling. Link looked up, and what he saw made his breath catch. Above him, where a ceiling or a floor should have been, was a vast, endless desert. The golden sands rippled beneath a burning sun, shimmering with unnatural heat. It was as if another world had been waiting just beyond the temple, hidden within its twisted magic. Before he could react, the mask's pull intensified, yanking him fully into the air. Tattle shrieked as Link's body launched upward, spinning weightlessly for a moment before he crashed into the scorching sands. Dazed, he groaned and pushed himself up, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the desert pressing down on him. The chamber he had just been in was now above him, distant and unreal, as if suspended in a false sky. The shift in gravity had completely inverted reality. Then the ground shook. A deep, guttural rumble echoed across the dunes. Sand burst into the air in great billowing clouds. Link staggered to his feet, shielding his eyes as something massive stirred beneath the surface. Tattle hovered nervously. "Link, I think we're not alone." Before Link could respond, the sands erupted. A colossal shadow emerged from below, its enormous form arcing through the sky like a serpent breaching the ocean. A long, segmented body, covered in thick, armored plating, glistened under the harsh sun. Its massive head was adorned with curved, jagged horns, and its glowing eyes locked onto Link with a primal hunger. With a thunderous crash, the monstrous creature dove back into the sand, sending another violent tremor through the ground. Tattle's voice was barely more than a whisper. "No way," Twin mold. The sand beneath Link trembled once more as another massive shadow surged upward. A second creature, identical to the first, erupted from the dunes, its armored body twisting high into the air before slamming back down with an earth-shaking crash. The two enormous beasts, serpentine titans with gleaming scales like molten rock, circled through the sky, their hulking forms weaving between each other in an eerie, synchronized dance of destruction. Tattle darted through the air, panic in her voice. "Of course, they come in pairs. Link, what are we supposed to do? They're bigger than everything." The creatures were massive, their sheer scale defying all sense of reason. Their bodies could coil around the entire moon, their heads alone dwarfed the clock tower. Their glowing eyes burned like embers as they surfaced, twisting through the air with a terrifying grace before diving back beneath the sand. Link gritted his teeth, feeling small, helpless, as he clutched his sword tighter. How was he supposed to fight something like this? Then his eyes fell on the iron mask at his feet. It lay there as if waiting. His fingers curled around the cold, heavy metal. Before, it had rejected him. But now, in the presence of these titans, it seemed almost inviting. He hesitated only for a second. Then, without another thought, Link raised the mask to his face. The moment it touched his skin, pain shot through his skull. The mask latched on with an unnatural force, sealing itself to his face. A wave of searing heat pulsed through his body, his muscles tensing, bones creaking as they stretched. His entire form surged upward, his limbs expanding, his armor groaning under the pressure as he grew. The desert seemed to shrink around him. The twin mold no longer loomed above like impossible giants. He now stood among them, matching their scale. Tattle gasped. Link? Link's breath came heavy and strained beneath the iron mask. His vision blurred slightly, the mask's weight pressing down on his skull like a vice. It was hard to breathe, as if the air itself resisted him. His body still ached from the transformation, his new size foreign and overwhelming. But there was no time to hesitate. He reached behind him, gripping the hilt of his now enormous sword. The blade, once fit for a kokiri, was now a colossal weapon, reflecting the burning desert sun. He steadied himself, adjusting to his newfound stature. Then, with a powerful step forward, sending sand flying in all directions, he charged at the twin mold. The ground quaked beneath Link's colossal steps as he rushed toward twin mold, his massive blade trailing behind him. The desert wind howled, sending waves of burning sand swirling around his legs as he swung at the first serpent, his strike carving through the air like a falling mountain. His sword met hardened scales, sending a shockwave up his arms. The impact barely fazed the beast, only pushing it back slightly as it twisted through the sky, its glowing eyes fixed on him with eerie intelligence. The second twin mold burst from the sand behind him. Link barely had time to turn before the massive creature coiled around his torso like a vice, its armored hide digging into him with crushing force. He gritted his teeth, muscles straining against the titan's grip as it lifted him off the ground. With a roar of defiance, Link threw himself forward, wrenching free just as the beast's tail cracked against his back like a whip. The blow sent him hurtling across the desert, crashing into a massive slab of ancient stone, the ruins shattering beneath his weight. Dust and debris exploded into the air. He groaned, staggering to his feet. The heat was unbearable. His breath came in ragged gasps beneath the iron mask, each inhale feeling like fire in his lungs. The mask was heavy, its unnatural power sapping his strength with every movement. He couldn't hear tattle. He couldn't hear anything except the relentless pounding of his own heartbeat. Twin mold dove again. Link barely rolled to the side in time as one of the titanic creatures slammed into the sand where he had just stood, the impact sending out a shockwave that rattled the ruins. He steadied himself, gripping his sword with both hands. With newfound determination, Link raised his blade and charged. His body screamed in protest, exhaustion clawing at him, but he pressed on. The beasts were fast, but now, so was he. One of the twin mold swooped low, its gaping maw rushing toward him. Link leapt, dodging to the side at the last moment and driving his blade deep into the creature's neck. A piercing shriek filled the air. The beast writhed, trying to shake him off, but Link held firm, dragging his sword downward in a powerful arc. Chunks of armor peeled away, revealing the dark, pulsing flesh beneath. But the second twin mold wasn't idle. Before Link could react, its massive tail swung around and smashed into him, sending him skidding across the sand once more. He barely stopped himself before falling into another crumbling ruin. His vision swam. His muscles burned. The weight of this demanding mask felt unbearable now, his head throbbing with each heartbeat. But he wasn't done. With sheer willpower, Link gripped his sword and prepared for the final strike. The remaining twin mold let out an ear-splitting screech, its massive body thrashing through the desert sky like a wounded serpent. It moved faster, twisting and diving erratically, sending towering waves of sand into the air. Link steadied himself, his colossal frame still aching from the last attack, but he gritted his teeth and charged once more. The beast struck first, lunging at him with its gaping maw. Link barely managed to sidestep, raising his sword and slashing at its underbelly as it passed. The blade connected, carving a deep wound into its armored flesh, sending dark ichor spraying into the sand below. Twinmold shrieked in fury, twisting in midair and coming back around, its tail whipping toward Link like a giant flail. He braced himself, lifting his blade to block the strike. The impact sent him skidding backward, his feet carving deep trenches into the sand. He gasped for breath, the weight of the giant mask pressing on him harder than before, every movement feeling like lifting mountains. His vision blurred from exhaustion, his arms trembled. The beast wasn't giving him time to recover. It dove at him again, its entire body spinning like a cyclone, attempting to crush him beneath its sheer force. But Link was ready. At the last moment, he leapt forward, raising his blade high. With all his strength, he swung downward, the sword cleaving straight into Twinmold's skull. The creature froze. For a long, drawn-out second, the desert fell eerily silent. Then, the Twinmold let out a final horrific wail as its body convulsed, twisting and writhing in its death throes before finally collapsing into the sand with a thunderous crash. Link staggered back, his chest heaving. His entire body screamed in agony, the weight of the giant mask crushing him. He desperately reached up and tore it off. Instantly, his body shrank back to normal size. He collapsed onto his hands and knees, his breath ragged, his vision swimming. His arms shook with exhaustion, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had never felt so drained before. The mask had taken more from him than he realized. For a moment, he simply lay there, trying to catch his breath, the desert wind brushing against his skin. Then, slowly, he forced himself to stand. "Link, you did it." Tattle flew up to his side. "You actually did it. I can't believe it. You really are a hero." Link turned toward the fallen Twinmold, and there, resting among the ruins, was a mask. A mask shaped like the very beasts he had just slain. Link stepped forward and picked up the mask. And, once again, the world faded, one final time. Chapter 28. The void stretched endlessly before Link, silent and heavy. The air shimmered with an eerie purple haze, shifting and swirling like living mist. The lone figure in the distance, the giant, remained obscured, its massive form barely visible through the fog. Then, the deep voice rumbled once more. "Call us at the right moment. We are ready." Tattle turned to Link, who hovered beside him, her glow flickering softly in the endless darkness. "That's what he said," she murmured. She turned back to the giant. "We understand." Link's fingers tightened around his ocarina. The meaning was clear. The giants, they were waiting. And when the time came, they would answer. He lifted the ocarina to his lips. The sound of the giant's deep, mournful tones echoed in his mind. He carefully mimicked their call, his fingers moving with purpose over the instrument. Each note resonated through the void, the song taking form, piece by piece, until it was whole. The moment the final note left his lips, the void around him pulsed. A deep vibration rippled through the air, and the fog began to recede. The giant, though still distant, seemed closer now, its presence undeniable. The song was complete. And with it, Link understood. This was the power to call the giants for their aid in the final moments. The ancient guardians of Termina were all awake and ready. The path was set. Link blinked, the strange void fading away as his vision returned to the bright, open sky of Akana Canyon. The weight of the eerie dreamlike space lifted, replaced by the warmth of the sun beating down on his shoulders. He turned to look behind him, where the towering passage to Stone Tower once loomed. There was now only solid rock, as if the entrance had never existed at all. The trials of the temple, the endless desert, the monstrous Twinmold, all of it felt like a dream, yet the weight in his satchel, the mask he had claimed, proved otherwise. Tattle flitted ahead, turning in the air as she scanned the horizon. She let out a small sigh. "I don't even know what time it is anymore," she admitted, almost to herself. Feels like we were in that place forever. She trailed off, and then her glow dimmed slightly as she turned her gaze upward. The moon still hung in the sky, its enormous, menacing form closer than ever, looming over Clock Town. The final day had come. Tattle was silent for a long moment before finally speaking again, her voice unusually steady. "This is it, huh?" she murmured. "Our journey's almost over." She turned toward Link. "I mean, we know what we have to do now," she continued. "The giants, they're waiting. We've got everything we need. We have to go back to Clock Town, to the top of the clock tower." Her tiny wings flickered in the afternoon light. But before that, she hesitated, then sighed. I want to say it again. I'm sorry." She hovered a little closer. "For everything. For how I treated you at the start, for dragging you into this, for what the Skull Kid did to you. I know it isn't really him, it's that mask, but I still feel responsible a little. He was my friend too, you know." Her glow pulsed gently as she turned away. "But we can save him. And Tail. And everyone." She faced Link once more, her usual confidence returning, though softer than before. "So, come on. Let's finish this." Link nodded and took his first step back to Clock Town. Chapter 29. Link made his way across the broken bridge, the sound of rushing water below mixing with the distant wind sweeping through Akana Canyon. The weight of his journey pressed on him. There was no time to waste. The moon was falling, and he knew exactly where he needed to go. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. On a narrow cliffside path, just barely visible between the rocks and sparse brush, a familiar figure moved carefully, ducking into the shadows. The boy with the blue hair, the same one Link had seen on the first day in Clock Town, the one he was always watching from a distance but could never catch. Tattle sighed, fluttering beside him. "You really can't just ignore people in need, can you?" she said, though there was a warmth in her voice. All right. One last time. But after this, we're going straight to Clock Town, got it?" Link nodded and quietly followed after the boy, careful not to make his presence known just yet. The figure moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to look around before slipping between the bushes. He was hiding, avoiding someone. After a short pursuit, Link finally caught up as the boy reached a strange, large boulder nestled against the cliffside. He froze when he noticed Link behind him, his shoulders tensing. "Who are you?" The boy's voice was sharp, defensive. "Are you?" He stopped, then hesitated. His eyes studied Link, searching for something, and then, after a moment, he sighed in relief. "No, you're not with him." The tension in his posture faded slightly. He took a deep breath before meeting Link's gaze. "My name is Cafe," he said, his voice calmer now. "You've probably heard my name before. Everyone is looking for me. I've been in hiding. I'm supposed to be married, but as you can see." His hands clenched into fists. "Everything changed when I woke up as a child." Tattle let out a small gasp but didn't interrupt, knowing that the Skull Kid and his adoration for tricks was behind this. Cafe continued, his voice thick with frustration. "I don't know how it happened. I don't know why it happened. But while I was trying to figure it out, he came, the thief, Zakan. He stole the mask Unju and I were supposed to exchange at our wedding, my sun mask." His eyes darkened. "I swore I'd get it back. I couldn't face Unju like this, not until I had something to show her, proof that I hadn't given up. So I followed Zakan's trail here." He looked toward the cave. "This is his hideout." "I know it is." He turned back to Link, his expression uncertain. "I know I have to do this alone. But I don't know if I can. Please, will you help me?" Both Link and Tattle nodded in unison. Suddenly, a rustling came from the nearby bushes, and out of the shadows emerged a strange, lanky man. His movements were unnatural, almost theatrical, as he pranced forward in an odd, rhythmic gait, with a twisted grin spread across his face as he glanced around the area. "There you are, my precious," he muttered, his voice oozing with self-satisfaction. Cafe tensed immediately, his fists clenching at his sides. "That's him. That's Zakan." Sakan took a few exaggerated steps forward and, with a flourish, reached down to a hidden switch embedded in the ground. With a click, the strange boulder at the base of the cliff groaned open, revealing the entrance to a dark cave. Now, Sakan chuckled to himself. Looks like that moon is going to fall after all. Guess I better hide out. Sakan chuckled again. Kafei's eyes widened. We have to go now. The moment Sakan stepped inside, Kafei sprinted after him, his small legs moving as fast as they could. Link wasted no time and followed right behind, just as the heavy stone door started sliding shut. The two barely made it through before the entrance sealed behind them, trapping them inside Sakan's hideout. Inside, the air was damp and stale, the only light coming from torches lining the stone walls. Ahead, the passage split into two rooms separated by iron bars. Sakan was nowhere to be found, but on one side, a platform held a mask, its golden sun emblem unmistakable. The sun's mask. Kafei gasped. There it is. But before he could rush forward, a mechanism suddenly activated. The pedestal beneath the mask began to tilt, and the mask started sliding toward a conveyor belt leading to a deep, black abyss. No! Kafei shouted. Tattle darted ahead, her light flickering urgently. We need to stop it before it falls. The room was lined with blocks and switches, some doors locked by barriers, others requiring precise movement to keep going. A strange mechanism controlled the conveyor belt, steadily moving the mask toward its doom. Looks like we have to do this together, Kafei said, determination in his voice. Without hesitation, the two of them got to work. Link took the right path, battling Armo's guards that activated whenever he stepped on a switch. His sword flashed as he struck down the living statues, clearing the way to new levers that controlled doors on Kafei's side. Meanwhile, Kafei, unable to fight, pushed heavy blocks onto switches to keep the gates open. Each puzzle required them to work in sync, Link opening doors for Kafei, Kafei pressing switches to allow Link to advance further. The conveyor belt moved slowly but surely, the sun's mask inching ever closer to the abyss. We're running out of time, Tattle warned. Kafei gritted his teeth, shoving the last block into place. A final switch activated, and the iron bars before him shot open. Now's my chance. He sprinted forward, diving just as the mask was about to slip off the ledge. His fingers closed around it. With a triumphant gasp, he clutched the mask to his chest, rolling onto his back as the conveyor belt finally powered down. Tattle twirled in the air. You did it. Kafei sat up, holding the mask as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His hands trembled. I got it back. His voice was barely above a whisper, then stronger. I got it back. Link let out a relieved breath, sheathing his sword. Link and Kafei burst out of the hideout with the flick of a lever opening the entrance from the inside, their feet pounding against the rocky ground as they hurried back toward Akana Canyon's entrance. The sky above was a deepening orange, the final hours of the third day creeping upon them. The looming moon cast an eerie shadow over the land, its menacing grin a constant reminder of the ever-ticking clock. I need to get to Clock Town, Kafei urged. Link nodded and pulled out his ocarina, the familiar notes of Epona's song echoing through the canyon. A few moments later, the distant sound of galloping hooves reached their ears. From beyond the cliffs, Epona sprinted into view, her mane flowing like fire in the evening light. Quickly, Tattle urged. Kafei hesitated for only a second before hoisting himself onto Epona's back behind Link. As soon as he was secure, Link urged Epona forward, and they took off at full speed across the canyon's narrow pathways. The ride to Clock Town was a blur, through the winding paths of the canyon, through the field and any keys or wolfos emerging with the night, through the town guards standing at the city's entrance who paid them little mind. The moment they passed the town's walls, Kafei gripped Link's shoulder. The stockpot in, he shouted over the wind. Hurry! Link didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Epona to a stop just outside the inn, and both of them dismounted in one swift motion. Without pause, Kafei sprinted toward the entrance, Link right behind him. Inside, the inn was eerily quiet. Most people had fled the town by now, seeking safety from the impending doom above. The wooden floor creaked beneath their hurried steps as Kafei dashed up the stairs. Link followed him down the hall until they reached a familiar room. Kafei pushed open the door. The room was empty. He stood frozen in the doorway, his breath hitching. His shoulders slumped. "No," he murmured. "She's not here." Tattle flitted beside him, her glow dim. "Maybe she." A small gasp from behind them made them both turn. Standing in the doorway was Unju, her hand covering her mouth, her wide eyes glistening with tears. She took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kafei?" Kafei took a hesitant step forward, his hands tightening around the sun mask. His voice was quiet but steady. "Yes, it's me." He looked down, ashamed. "Something happened to me. I became like this. And I wanted to see you, I wanted to come back, but I couldn't. Not like this." His fingers trembled against the mask. "I was afraid." Unju didn't speak. Her lips quivered, her eyes fixed on him as if trying to take in every detail. Then, she glanced down at the sun mask in his hands, and tears spilled down her cheeks. With a shaky breath, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a mask of her own, the moon mask, its soft, pale surface gleaming in the dim candlelight. The two masks symbolizing their love had finally come together. Slowly, Unju dropped to her knees, lowering herself to Kafei's eye level. "I don't care what form you take, Kafei," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't care if you're a child, a man, or something else entirely. You're the one I love." Her hands reached for his, fingers brushing over his knuckles before curling around them tightly. "You're the one I was waiting for." Kafei's breath hitched, and without another word, he lunged forward, wrapping his arms around her. Unju pulled him close, holding him against her chest as she wept. He clutched onto her just as tightly, as if afraid to let go. They stayed like that for a long time, the flickering lanterns casting their embrace in soft, golden light. Eventually, they turned toward Link. Unju wiped her tears, offering him a grateful smile. "The moon is going to fall soon," she said softly. "You should get out of town while you still can." "Don't worry about us," Kafei added, nodding. "We're fine. As long as we're together, we're fine." A low rumble shook the inn. The walls trembled. Dust trickled from the ceiling. The final hours had come. Tattle hovered beside Link. "It's time," she said quietly. Link gave them one last glance, his heart heavy, before turning to leave. As he stepped out into the empty streets of Clock Town, the bells began to toll, echoing across the hollow city. Chapter 30. Link took a deep breath and stepped into the empty plaza, the eerie silence making his footsteps echo. The moon loomed overhead, its grotesque face twisted in a menacing grin, closer than ever before. Without hesitation, Link uncoiled his hookshot, aiming for the ledge of the open clock tower door. The mechanism clicked, the chain shot forward, and in an instant, he was pulled upward, landing in a crouch at the tower's entrance. The air inside was thick with the hum of dark magic. Link sprinted up the spiraling staircase, taking the steps two at a time. At the top, he pushed through the doors and emerged onto the clock tower's peak. There, in the center of the platform, the Skull Kid hovered in his casual stance of dominance. The mask on his face pulsed with a sickly purple light, tendrils of energy snaking out into the air around him. Above, the moon loomed even larger, its surface cracked and seething with ancient power. The scene was exactly the same as the first time. "Tail!" Tal cried, breaking the silence. From below, the small purple fairy flitted forward, urgency in his tiny voice. "Swamp, mountain, ocean, canyon. Bring the ones who are there here." The Skull Kid twitched, his head jerking unnaturally. A distorted chuckle echoed from him, hollow and inhuman. Without warning, he lashed out, striking Tail with an invisible force. The little fairy was thrown backward, tumbling through the air before catching himself weakly. "Shut up, stupid fairy!" Tattle gasped, flying toward him. "Tail!" The Skull Kid tilted his head, the emotionless face of the mask somehow seeming more menacing. Well, whatever. His voice dripped with condescension. Even they couldn't stop what I am now. He let out a high-pitched shriek, the air vibrating with the sheer force of it. His arms stretched toward the sky, and the moon began to descend faster, pulled by his will. The entire tower shuddered beneath Link's feet. "Link, hurry!" Tatl yelled over the growing wind. "Play the song." Link wasted no time. He pulled out his ocarina, the cool surface familiar in his hands. Closing his eyes, he took a steadying breath and pressed it to his lips. The first notes rang out, low, solemn, and commanding. The song he had pieced together over his journey, the melody the giants had entrusted to him. The oath to order. The final note faded into the night, leaving only silence in its wake. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground trembled. A low, distant rumble rolled across the land, growing in intensity like the beating of a giant drum. The Skull Kid twitched in the air, his head snapping around in confusion. His glowing eyes darted to the east, the west, the north, and the south. No, 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 no. His hands clutched his head, fingers digging into the cursed mask as he let out an ear-piercing shriek. He kicked his legs wildly, thrashing like a child throwing a tantrum, but his otherworldly cries were drowned out by something greater, deep, resonant voices echoing from the horizon. From the farthest reaches of Termina, the giants emerged. One by one, they took massive, deliberate steps across the land. From the swamp, the mountain, the ocean, and the canyon, their towering forms moved with unshakable purpose, their heavy footsteps shaking the very earth. As they neared Clock Town, their immense shadows stretched across the fields, and with each step, their voices grew louder, haunting, ancient cries that resonated through the night like a song of forgotten gods. Then they arrived. The four giants stood at the edges of the city, their massive frames dwarfing the buildings below. Their long, sinewy arms reached skyward, fingers splayed wide. The moon, still descending, seemed to push against them. Its weight was unbearable, its malevolent force refusing to yield. The giants trembled, their bodies swaying under the strain. For a moment, it seemed as if they would fail. But then, with one final, unified cry, they pushed. The descent slowed. The Skull Kid screamed in fury, his body twisting and writhing. "No! Stop it!" His voice was shrill, desperate. But it was too late. The moon's advance came to a grinding halt, hovering just above Clock Town. The giants stood firm, holding it back with all their strength. The impossible had happened. The moon had stopped falling. Tatl gasped, looking up at the massive form of the moon still looming above them. "It stopped," she exclaimed, breathless. The song worked. The giants, they really came. Tail fluttered forward excitedly. The two fairies turned to each other, and in a rare moment, Tatl and Tail fluttered together happily, their glowing forms twirling together in relief. "You're okay," Tatl murmured, for once dropping her usual sharpness. "You're really okay." With a dull thud, the Skull Kid's body collapsed to the ground, limp and unmoving. Tatl hovered over him, her moment of concern quickly overtaken by a surge of anger. "Serves you right," she spat. "After everything you did, all the trouble you caused." But Tail's small voice wavered. "He was just lonely." Tatl whipped around. "That's no excuse," she snapped. "He hurt people, Tail. He hurt you. He nearly destroyed Termina. If the giants hadn't stopped the moon, we'd all be." "But it wasn't really him, was it?" Tail insisted. "He wasn't in control." "Not in control?" Tatl scoffed. "He let that mask take over. He gave in." Their argument escalated, emotions boiling over after all they had endured. Then, a new voice cut through the tension. "Yes, this puppet had far too many weaknesses." Tatl froze. The voice was not Tail's. It was cold, distant, wrong. She turned, and her breath caught. The Skull Kid's lifeless body was rising into the air. No, not rising, being lifted. An unseen force held him aloft, his limbs dangling like a broken marionette. Tal barely had time to process what she was seeing before the voice spoke again, its tone dripping with quiet malice. A puppet that can no longer be used is mere garbage. With that, the Skull Kid's body was dropped. He hit the ground with a dull, final thud. The fairies darted back in alarm as something else remained floating in the air. The Majora's mask. It hovered eerily, as if studying them, its empty eyes now burning with unnatural energy. Then, it spoke once more. This puppet's role has just ended. The ground trembled. A low, guttural groan rumbled from above as the moon's enormous mouth began to creak open. The gaping void inside seemed endless, an abyss of swirling darkness. The Majora's mask floated upward, drawn into the moon's maw by some unseen force of its own volition. As it ascended, the moon's hollow eyes began to glow, radiating a malevolent energy. Then, the moon moved. With a sudden, violent lurch, it shoved downward once more, pressing against the giants with renewed force. The four giants staggered, their massive feet grinding into the earth as they fought against the moon's immense power. Their cries echoed across Termina, pained, strained, desperate. Dark energy spiraled up into the moon's open mouth, twisting like a black vortex, growing stronger by the second. Tattle turned to Link, panic setting in. "Link," she cried. "This isn't over. It's still trying to fall." The dark tendrils of energy stretched further, and the giant struggled. "We have to go," she pleaded, tugging at Link's tunic. "Play the Song of Time. Reset everything. If we go back, maybe we can stop this before it." But Link wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the moon, his grip tightening around the ocarina at his side. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to reset time. He was going inside. Tattle's voice wavered. "No. Link, you can't be serious." "I'll go." Tail suddenly spoke up, surprising both of them. He floated forward, determined. "If Tattle won't, then I will." Tattle turned sharply. "Tail." But her brother was resolute. Tattle hesitated, her wings fluttering erratically. She looked at Link again. He was serious. He wasn't backing down. Finally, she let out a sharp sigh, muttering under her breath, "Ugh, you're the worst." Then, more firmly, she said, "Fine. I'm coming too. But you better not get yourself killed, got it?" Link nodded, and that was all the confirmation he needed. The dark energy continued to spiral, stretching toward them. And then, they let go. The force pulled them upward, yanking them into the void. The world blurred. Everything faded to black. Chapter 31. Link's eyes fluttered open. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, rustling the soft grass beneath him. He blinked, adjusting to the warm, golden light that bathed the landscape. He was no longer in the suffocating darkness of the moon's maw. He could no longer hear the strain of the giants holding up the moon. And Tattle was no longer by his side. Instead, he found himself in a vast, open field stretching endlessly in every direction. The sky was a soft, cloudless blue, the sun high and warm. Birds chirped in the distance, and a peaceful stillness hung in the air, as if this place existed outside of time itself. In the center of it all, atop a gentle hill, stood a large tree. Its branches stretched wide, thick with deep green leaves, casting dappled shadows over the ground below. Laughter rang out. Link turned his gaze toward the tree and saw 4 children running in circles around it, playing together. Each child wore a different mask, ones that Link immediately recognized. The Odalwa mask, the goat mask, the Jorg mask, the twin mold mask. The sight made his stomach twist. These were the masks of the fallen giants, the ones he had taken from the dark horrors that had consumed the temples of Termina. Yet here, the children wearing them played as if they carried no weight, no curse, no sorrow. They looked strangely familiar, with their short red hair and Hylian ears peeking from beneath their masks. But their faces were hidden, obscured by the ornate designs of the masks they wore. Then, Link noticed another figure. A 5th child. Unlike the others, this child was sitting alone, leaning against the massive tree trunk. He was smaller than the others, curled inward, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. And on his face, Majora's mask. But unlike before, there was no malice. No piercing glow. No unnatural movement. Not controlling. He was simply sitting there, still and silent, almost as if he were afraid. Suddenly the child wearing the Odolwa mask approached him. The child's steps were light, almost weightless, as if he were moving through a dream. Stopping just a few feet away, the child tilted his head, peering up at Link through the hollow eye holes of his mask. Though his face was obscured, there was an unmistakable innocence about him, an absence of malice, unlike the monstrous figure the mask had once represented. Then, the child spoke. His voice was soft and thoughtful, carrying an eerie wisdom beyond his small form. "Friend, do you consider yourself to have friends?" Link blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What is a friend?" the child mused. "Is it someone who follows you? Someone who needs you? Someone who simply exists in the same space as you?" The wind whispered through the tall grass. The other children continued playing in the distance, their laughter soft and distant. Or is a friend something more? Is a friend someone who stays by your side, even when the road is long? Someone who calls your name, even when you cannot answer? Someone who reaches for you, even when you pull away? The child took a small step forward. "Do they think of you as their friend?" Link's grip tightened around the hilt of his sword. His mind raced with images, Tavel, always beside him, scolding him, encouraging him, guiding him. The giants, their voices distant, yet watching over him. The people of Termina, living through their final hours, unaware of how much he had fought for them. The friend he had been searching for that led him to this place. Had they ever truly thought of him as a friend? Did he? The child stood in silence, waiting, not for an answer in words, but for understanding. Then, he slowly lifted his small hand, palm open, waiting. Link felt something stir deep within him. Somehow, he knew what was needed. Reaching into his satchel, his fingers closed around the smooth, familiar surface of the Deku mask. He pulled it out and looked at it one last time. This mask had been his first transformation. His first burden in this world, the end result of his search for a long, lost friend. And yet, it had been more than that. It had given him an identity when he had none. A form to move forward with. Now, it was time to let it go. He placed the mask into the child's waiting hand. The child looked down at it, then up at Link. For the first time, the child's voice held excitement. "Thank you." And in an instant, he was gone. Vanished into the air as if he had never been there at all. The second child, the one wearing the goat mask, skipped toward Link with an eager bounce in his step. He moved with an energy that contrasted the quiet stillness of the world around them, his presence like a gust of wind rushing through an otherwise calm meadow. Stopping just before Link, the child tilted his head and asked, "Are you happy?" The child giggled, rocking on his heels. "What does happiness feel like to you? Is it the warmth of the sun on your face? The laughter of someone dear to you? Or is it something else, something harder to find?" He spun in a small circle before stopping abruptly. "And what about others? Do you think your happiness makes others happy? Or do you carry happiness alone?" The word struck something deep within Link. Memories surfaced unbidden. Darmani, standing tall and proud, speaking with unwavering confidence to his people. Darmani, who had fought to protect them, to bring them peace, to lead them into a future without fear. Darmani, who had failed, who had lost his battle, who had died, haunted by the sorrow of knowing he had let down those who had looked up to him. Was Darmani happy when he was alive? Or had he been so consumed with bringing happiness to others that he forgot to hold on to his own? Link reached into his satchel, fingers brushing against the cool, familiar surface of the Goron mask. He pulled it out and gazed at it, feeling its weight in his hands. It was more than just a mask, it was the burden of a fallen hero, the spirit of a warrior who had longed to bring joy to his people, but had met only despair. The child giggled again, holding out his hands expectantly. Without hesitation, Link handed him the mask. The child cradled it as if it were a precious treasure, then beamed up at Link. Thank you. And just like the first, he was gone. Hearing the other children playing just out of sight, Link walked around the great tree, its massive roots twisting into the grass like the veins of the world itself. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves above, their soft whispers carrying a strange serenity. As he moved past the trunk, he spotted two of the remaining children playing together, weaving through the air as if they were caught in an invisible current. The child wearing the Jorg mask noticed him first. With outstretched arms, the boy mimicked the movements of a soaring bird, weaving side to side as he approached. His steps were light, almost as if he were gliding, his motions fluid and carefree. He stopped just before Link and tilted his head, his voice carrying a playful yet thoughtful tone. How do you know you're doing the right thing? The question was direct yet complicated. The child swayed like a wave caught in a current. The right thing? It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes it feels clear, like the wind pushing you forward. Other times, it's like swimming in deep waters, with no way of knowing which way is up. So how do you know? Link remained silent. The child continued, his voice steady but full of curiosity. Does doing the right thing mean making yourself happy? Or does it mean sacrificing that happiness for others? And if you do the right thing, but it changes nothing, was it worth it? The words settled heavily on Link's shoulders. He thought of Mikau. Mikau, the proud guitarist of the Indigogos, a musician, a warrior, a friend. Mikau, who had risked everything to retrieve Lulu's stolen eggs, who had fought against those who would do harm, who had done the right thing. And still, he had failed. Dying alone on the beach away from his friends, his body growing cold beneath the sun as he drifted on the waves, leaving behind only his final song to a stranger and the sorrow of what he could not do. Had it been worth it? Link reached into his satchel, his fingers closing around the Zora mask. The smooth, intricate surface felt different now, as if it carried the weight of the question the child had asked. Slowly, he lifted it and placed it in the child's waiting hand. The boy's lips curled into a small smile, as if satisfied with the answer. Thank you. And then, he was gone. The final child stood alone in the field, spinning in slow, lazy circles, his arms outstretched as if feeling the air move around him. His twin mold mask bobbed slightly with each turn, the oversized eyes of the mask staring blankly ahead. Link approached cautiously, and as if sensing him, the child stopped spinning. He turned to face Link, tilting his head. You wear many faces, the child mused, his voice light but filled with an odd depth, as though he were speaking from somewhere beyond the peaceful field. Link remained silent. The child continued, stepping closer, his small fingers tapping the mask on his face. Masks are strange things, aren't they? They let you become someone else. A hero, a monster, a friend, a stranger. But when you wear them for too long, do you forget which one is really you? Link's grip on his sword tightened. The child took another step forward. What about the masks that don't change how you look, but how others see you? The ones that make people trust you. The ones that make people fear you. The ones that make people love you. Link's mind drifted, unbidden, to those he had helped in his journey, how he had wore masks pretending to be others, fooling them. There were those that accepted him only as a Deku, those that congratulated the successes of Darmani and Mikau despite them being Link in disguise. Was that right? Camaro, the wandering spirit who danced alone beneath the moonlight, unable to rest until his dance was shared. Link had worn his mask, had carried his dream forward. Had he been Camaro in that moment? Or had he only borrowed his sorrow? Cremia, who had ridden with Link in her wagon, speaking to him as if he were her own younger brother, and he had become her savior when he saved her from the Gorman brothers. Link wore the hood he obtained from them to trick the Garo, to go deeper into the canyon, leading to their own demise, but eventually led him to saving the researcher in Akana. The researcher in Akana, desperate to study the Gibdo, to understand them, to bring his daughter peace. Link had worn the Gibdo mask he obtained from him, pretending to be a creature of the undead, walking among them, allowing him to reach Akana Castle and free the spirits of Igos Du Akana and his servants. By pretending to be others, by wearing these masks, he was able to help so many. He had done the right thing. Link's hand drifted to his satchel, where the Camaro mask, the Gibdo mask, and the Garo mask rested. You helped them, the child said, as if reading Link's thoughts. But did they ever really know you? If you take off all your masks, who are you then? Link hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled the 3 masks from his bag and placed them in the child's outstretched hands. The child beamed. Thank you. He spun once, twice, faster and faster, the masks catching the air as he twirled. Then, in a flash of light, he was gone. And now, only one child remained. Link approached the final child, who remained seated against the tree, his arms wrapped around his knees. Unlike the others, he had not run up to meet Link, nor had he played in the field. He simply sat there, still and quiet as if he had been waiting, the menacing Majora's mask covering his face. The child slowly turned his head toward Link. His voice was small, yet filled with an unmistakable weight. They've all gone, haven't they? Link nodded. The child let out a soft sigh, lowering his chin onto his arms. Did you make them go away? Link hesitated, then nodded again. The child was silent for a moment before whispering, "Thank you." There was no joy in his voice. Instead, there was something else, something hollow, something lost. He shifted slightly, hugging his knees tighter. But now I'm all alone. His voice grew quieter. Not that this is much different than before. He lifted his head and looked at Link. His eyes, obscured beneath the mask, seemed to search for something. You don't have any masks left, do you? Link shook his head. The child tilted his head, then slowly extended his small hand. Then, I'll give you one. Link reached out, and as their hands met, something cold and smooth pressed into his palm. He looked down to see a mask unlike any other, pale white with elegant red and blue markings, the face on the mask seeming strangely familiar. Even without wearing it, he could feel the immense power thrumming within it, as if the mask itself was alive. The child stood up now, his posture relaxed, but something in the air had changed. A pause. Then, his voice came softer than before, but with an undeniable weight. Okay, let's play. Chapter 32. Link, wake up. His eyes snapped open. The serene field and the great tree were gone. Instead, he found himself in a strange dark chamber with stars glinting in the distance through the invisible walls of the room. Link was bound by writhing, fleshy tendrils coiling around his arms, his legs, his chest, tightening, pulling him toward the pulsating form of Majora's mask. A guttural, otherworldly shriek echoed around him as the mask's tendrils twisted and wrapped tighter, trying to consume him, to pull him into its madness, trying to make him his next puppet, just like the Skull Kid. Gritting his teeth, Link reached for his sword, struggling against the vice-like grip of the tendrils. His fingers barely brushed against the hilt before he forced his hand forward, gripping it tight. With one swift motion, he swung, cutting through one of the grotesque limbs. A shrill, piercing scream rang out as the tendril recoiled, releasing him. The others loosened just enough for Link to roll free, gasping for breath as he scrambled to his feet. Majora's mask hovered in the air, pulsating violently, as if struggling to stay afloat from the pain, its tendrils curling inward in retreat. The air around them crackled with malevolent energy, the walls of this strange, shifting space undulating like the inside of some living nightmare. Tattle fluttered to Link's side, her voice urgent. I thought you were a goner for sure. That thing, she stopped mid-sentence, her light flickering as she noticed something in Link's hands. Wait, that mask. Link looked down, his breath still ragged. The deity mask. The mask the child had given him. It rested in his grip, its pale surface smooth and unassuming, yet radiating a power unlike anything he had felt before. A realization struck him. This mask was not like the others. This power didn't come from another spirit. It came from within him. It was his own strength, his own will, manifesting into something greater. He had borrowed the strength of others on his journey to get him here. Now he would rely on his own strength. He clenched the mask tightly in his hands. Link pulled the mask to his face, and the moment it touched his skin, It latched on not with pain like the others, but with a warmth that spread through his entire being. A radiant light engulfed him, blinding and pure. He felt his body shifting, stretching, his limbs growing stronger, his frame taller. The familiar weight of his tunic changing to that of chestplate armor faded, pristine and adorned with markings similar to those on the mask. His sword, too, transformed, its blade elongating, shimmering with divine energy, its edges curved and honed beyond anything he had wielded before. As the light dimmed, Tattle hovered around him, stunned. "Link, is that you?" Her voice was breathless with awe. His once youthful face was now mature, his eyes glowing with an ethereal white light, his expression calm yet powerful. This was not a borrowed form, this was something greater, something beyond mere masks. A deep, guttural hiss echoed through the space. Majora's mask twitched, its tendrils curling and snapping with agitation. Then, with a sudden violent jerk, its entire form contorted. Thick, sinewy limbs sprouted from its sides, twisting into grotesque arms and legs. Above the mask, a monstrous head took shape, its face a nightmarish mockery of a grin, eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. Two long whips coiled in its clawed hands, crackling with dark energy. With a shriek that sent tremors through the air, it cracked its whips against the floor, sending shock waves rippling outward. The air in the chamber grew heavy, crackling with raw energy as Link and Majora's mask faced off. The monstrous form of the mask twitched unnaturally, its whip-like tendrils writhing in anticipation. Link tightened his grip on his newly transformed sword, feeling the immense power coursing through him. With an ear-piercing shriek, Majora lashed out, its twin whips slicing through the air like burning streaks of energy. Link leapt back just in time as the whips cracked against the floor, leaving molten scars where they struck. He barely had a moment before Majora lunged, its grotesque limbs flailing wildly in an erratic, unpredictable dance of destruction. Link raised his shield just as a clawed hand swiped at him, the impact sending him sliding backward. The force would have broken his arm had he been in his normal form, but now he merely adjusted his stance, feeling his new body steady itself with ease. He retaliated. Slashing his sword forward, a beam of brilliant white light erupted from the blade, streaking toward Majora like a divine arrow. The blast struck its torso, sending the creature recoiling with an agonized screech. It staggered but did not fall. Instead, its whips lashed out again, forcing Link to roll to the side. Majora's attacks came faster now, twisting, spinning, flailing in a chaotic dance that defied any logic. It flipped onto its hands, its long legs kicking outward in a wild flurry, then spun back onto its feet, whipping its arms and tendrils in every direction. Link stayed focused, dodging and countering with beams of light from his sword. The energy blast slammed into Majora's form, staggering it again and again, but the mask's monstrous body refused to relent. With another shriek, it coiled its limbs inward, then suddenly shot forward like a bullet, crashing into Link with brutal force. The impact sent Link tumbling, but he landed on his feet, his enhanced reflexes keeping him balanced. He barely had time to breathe before Majora's whips shot out, wrapping around his wrist and ankle. A violent yank pulled him off his feet, and Majora spun him like a rag doll before hurling him across the chamber. Link crashed into the ground, but rolled to his feet instantly. Majora lunged again, but this time, Link was ready. He raised his sword high, channeling the full power within it. The blade pulsed with divine energy, and as Majora's twisted form bore down on him, Link swung downward with all his strength. A massive wave of pure light exploded from the blade, cutting through the air like a sacred crescent. The beam struck Majora head-on, engulfing the beast in radiant energy. Majora howled, its body twisting in agony, the dark tendrils of its form burning away under the holy power of the attack. It staggered backward, writhing violently, but the battle was not yet over. Link steadied himself, gripping his sword tightly. Majora's monstrous form convulsed violently, its twisted limbs retracting into the mask. With a final, shrill screech, The body it had formed disintegrated, leaving only the cursed mask floating in the air. But it was not defeated yet. The mask trembled with unstable energy, shifting erratically as it darted toward Link, slamming into him with wild desperation. Each impact sent a burst of dark energy rippling through the chamber, but Link barely flinched. He had grown stronger, stronger than Majora, stronger than the nightmare that had loomed over Termina. With each strike of his sword, the mask was pushed back, its attacks growing more frantic and ineffective. Majora twisted and spun, trying to ram into him again, but Link easily sidestepped, slashing his blade in a perfect arc. A searing beam of light shot forth, striking the mask squarely. Majora let out a distorted wail, as if realizing its end was near. It lunged one last time. Link stood firm, gripping his sword tightly. As Majora came hurtling toward him, he swung with all his might. The blade struck the very center of the mask, cleaving into its cursed form. A piercing scream erupted from Majora as cracks splintered across its surface, glowing with intense white light. The mask twitched and shuddered, trying to resist, but the fractures spread, the energy within bursting through. The light grew brighter and brighter, consuming everything. Link shielded his eyes as the entire chamber was engulfed in blinding radiance. The world around him vanished. Outside, the people of Clock Town held their breath as the moon, once an omen of impending doom, suddenly halted in the sky. For a brief moment, it hovered motionless. Then, with a soft shimmer, its form dissolved into pure light. The glowing remnants of the moon scattered like dust in the wind, drifting into the morning light and fading into nothingness. The giants, still standing at the edges of Clock Town, slowly lowered their massive hands, their mission complete. The silence that followed was deafening, but only for a moment. Then, one voice shouted in joy. Another followed. A wave of cheers and celebrations erupted throughout the residents of Clock Town, people embracing one another, crying, laughing, and rejoicing. They had been saved. The nightmare was over. Chapter 33. Link's eyes fluttered open to the gentle sound of voices. Above him, Tattle and Tail hovered excitedly, their tiny wings shimmering in the morning light. "Link, you're awake," Tal exclaimed, her usual sharp tone softened with relief. Tail bobbed up and down beside her, just as elated. Blinking against the brightness, Link slowly sat up. The air was calm, the sky a serene blue. The weight of doom that had loomed over Termina was gone, the moon was nowhere to be seen. Instead, all that remained was the quiet hum of the wind through the grass and the warmth of the rising sun. A few feet away, the Skull Kid stood still, his back turned to them, staring up at the four giants. Their colossal forms loomed above, watching him with their solemn, unreadable expressions. Skull Kid's small hands clenched at his chest. His voice wavered as he spoke. "So, you didn't forget about me?" His shoulders trembled. "You still thought of me as a friend?" He hunched over slightly, his fingers gripping at his tattered cloak. His breath hitched, and though he didn't let the tears fall, his body shook with the effort of holding them back. The giants let out their deep, mournful call, their voices echoing across Termina one last time. Then, slowly, they turned away, each stepping back toward the lands they had sworn to protect. Their towering figures faded into the horizon, returning to their distant homes. Tattle and Tail floated closer to Skull Kid, their small lights hovering gently around him. Tattle, usually so brash, softened as she watched him. Tail, without hesitation, nuzzled close to his old friend, his soft glow flickering like a quiet reassurance. Skull Kid turned to the fairies, his eyes wide and unsure. "I thought they didn't want to be my friend anymore," he admitted. Skull Kid blinked at them, his lips curling into the smallest, hesitant smile. He sniffled and rubbed at his eyes. "Friends are a nice thing to have," he whispered. The Skull Kid turned, his gaze settling on Link, who now stood beside Epona. His expression was no longer twisted with anger or sorrow, only a childlike innocence remained. With a small, hopeful smile, he took a few steps closer. "Oh, did you save me?" he asked, tilting his head. "Will you be my friend too?" There was no malice in his voice, no trace of the darkness that had once consumed him. He was simply a lonely child, yearning for connection. As he drew even nearer, he suddenly paused, his beak-like nose twitching. He leaned in, sniffing at Link with exaggerated curiosity before pulling back with a giggle. "Ha, you smell just like that fairy boy I met in the forest." He laughed again. Before Link could react, a voice interrupted from behind them. "So, the evil has left the mask after all." They all turned to see the happy mask salesman standing there, cradling Majora's mask in his hands. His ever-present, unsettling smile was in place, yet there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes as he examined the once-corrupted artifact. He turned the mask over, nodding to himself. "I am grateful to have it back. It is no longer a thing of great danger, merely a mask once more." His tone was light, but something about the way he handled the mask, almost reverently, sent a small shiver down Tal's wings. The salesman straightened and tucked the mask away. "But alas, I am in the midst of my travels," he said, his smile widening as he clasped his hands together. "So I must bid you farewell." With a graceful step, he moved between Link and the Skull Kid, passing them without another word. The Skull Kid lowered his head as the salesman walked by, his posture shrinking slightly, as if feeling the weight of everything that had happened, knowing what he did was wrong. As the Skull Kid stood in quiet reflection, a slow, deliberate clap broke the silence. Link turned to see the masked salesman standing nearby, his ever-present, knowing smile stretched across his face. It was as if he had been there all along, waiting for this moment. With an air of serene wisdom, the salesman took a step forward. "So, you'll be returning home too, won't you?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. Link met his gaze, but said nothing. There was no need for words, both of them already knew the answer. The salesman chuckled softly. "Whenever there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "Whether a parting be forever or merely for a short time, that is up to you." With a graceful bow, he turned to leave, but after only a few steps, he stopped and glanced back at Link once more. "You have made many people happy with the masks you found on your journey," he mused, his expression unreadable. "But more than that, you brought them true happiness." His smile deepened, eyes twinkling with something mysterious, perhaps pride, or perhaps something more enigmatic. Then, without another word, he turned away once more. Before anyone could react, the masked salesman's form wavered, his silhouette flickering like a mirage in the morning light. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone, vanished as if he had never been there at all. Tal hovers in place for a moment, watching the empty space where the masked salesman had just been, then turns to Link. "Well, we both got what we were after. This is where we split ways, don't you think?" She tilts her head as if trying to find the right words, but instead, she simply says, "It was kind of fun, you know, playing hero." Link nods silently, understanding what she's really saying. Tal's usual teasing edge creeping into her voice. "Not like I care or anything, but you should probably hurry off before you get roped into celebrating or something. We have a carnival to go to." Still, there's something different in her tone, something softer. Link turns without a word, making his way to Epona, who waits patiently in the grass. He places a hand on her mane before swinging himself onto her back. With a gentle kick, Epona starts forward, her hooves lightly thudding against the earth. Tal watches as Link rides away, her wings flickering. She waits, letting him get farther, her glow dimming ever so slightly. Then, when he is nearly a speck on the horizon, she finally calls out, "Link!" But he's already too far away to hear. Her wings lower, and she lets out a quiet sigh. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice barely audible. Tail drifts closer, hovering beside her in silent understanding. And then, from the distance, a brilliant explosion of colors erupts in the sky. The first firework of the carnival. One after another, bursts of red, blue, and gold illuminate the morning, marking the beginning of the carnival.